Thank you.
So how did it all start? I was born and raised in a beautiful town in Germany called Bamberg, born on May the 9th, 1958. And Bamberg is a city, historic city nestled in between Nuremberg and Würzburg in the north of Bavaria. Literally a time machine, a 1,000-year-old city, untouched by any wars. You walk into the city and you feel yourself in whatever century you want to be set back, you find this century. And in this historic city, I grew up with the imagination of what our teachers instilled upon us to be a citizen of a very famous city, a beautiful city, a historic city, and to appreciate history. So we learned everything from the 10th century, when the dome was started to build, for 200 years later it was completed, all details of history, walking the city, taking notes. But one thing I noticed, not because I'm more intelligent or brighter than any others, that certain aspects of history were taboo. We didn't talk about it. And it was obvious that something happened. Even for a 6, 7-year-old munchkin like I was in elementary school, something happened and we could feel it and see it. First of all, we knew that there was a war. I knew it at least. Because in the city of 75,000, we had 10,000 American soldiers and family members stationed. And one thing I knew about war is that in the war, people win and people lose. And when there are foreign soldiers in the town, obviously we didn't win that one. So that I knew. I also knew that we were living about 40, 50 miles close to the Iron Curtain, constant NATO exercises, planes visible in the sky. So we as children knew there's a war, there was a war, and there's an impact of the war in our society. When I asked at home who are my grandparents from my father's and my mother's side, I was told they're gone because of the war, but we don't want to talk about it. We're moving on, and we moved on. So the war was part of the society, was part of history. Nobody wanted to talk about it, and it was kind of this dark cloud is hanging above us. Slowly but surely, my parents decided to tell me about their family, and actually my family too, by telling me where they're from and who they are. My father told me on long walks that we had in summer in the forest, and in winter we had walks more in other areas that are not so snowed in. But every Sunday we were out. My father taught me how to handle a rifle, how to shoot, how to fish. We had a very close relationship. And I heard over and over again the same story, that he was the youngest tank commander in the German army, serving under the command of General Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg. And my father was the star, a young major, then lieutenant colonel. He was the star of all of them. And he was the hero. And this message that my father was a hero was reinforced by his old war buddies who came to visit our house at least once a year to talk about the time past, the war, and to celebrate the war as the best time of their lives. And they referred to my father as Arturo. My father's first name was Arthur. They referred to him as Arturo. And I should be proud to have such a father who was bearing the Knight's Cross, who was pinned by him on this, given to him, handed to him by Adolf Hitler personally, because my father conquered a strategically located town on the push towards Moscow, which of course then failed to materialize and further on. But my father was a hero, and the fact that he was a hero, I lived with it like a little boy, the knight in shining armor. I was mighty proud about him. My mother told me a completely different story, though, not of glory, not of honor, not of heroes, but a story of horror. She was an ethnic German, born and raised in Karlsbad in Czechoslovakia, where about 1.5 million Germans lived along the border between Czechoslovakia and Germany for hundreds of years and considered themselves as Sudetendeutsche, Germans in the Sudetenland, in the country of that called Sudetenland. And as a result of the war, my grandfather, who was a wealthy glove manufacturing merchant, had to flee together with my grandmother and my mother towards the west and lost everything. And as a result, they died. And so I had never met my grandfather and my grandmother, neither from maternal nor from paternal side. So the war had tremendous impact on our lives, but nobody wanted to talk about it. But there was something peculiar that was connected to the war too in our house that we were living in. We rented an apartment, or my parents rented an apartment in a large, a 2-story patrician style house that was more like a palace, huge building. And we rented the apartment from a lady upstairs that my mother referred to as the Countess, the Gräfin in German. And I should not talk to her unless spoken to. And right next to the wooden stairway leading upstairs to the Countess's apartment was a larger-than-life portrait of a man hanging on the wall in the corridor, depicting an officer in uniform with the officer's insignia, with the Knight's Cross around my neck and the officer's hat. And he looked like my father, whose pictures I saw at home in photographs. So when I asked my father who this man was, My father referred to him as the traitor, der Verräter, Habuget. And I was stunned, even in the age of 8, 9 years old. How can it be that two men who look alike, at least on pictures or on the painting, that one of them is good, my father, and one of them is bad, this man depicted on the portrait? Later, I learned that this man that my father referred to as the traitor was no other than Count Klaus von Stauffenberg, the German colonel who was leading the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler on July the 20th in 1944, which unfortunately failed. He was executed with others the same night. His widow, Nina von Stauffenberg, lived upstairs. She was arrested, thrown in a concentration camp in Ravensbrück, and survived together with the 3 children and reunited and moved back in the house that belonged to them. So I was in the shadow of history, literally in the shadow of history. And whenever my parents slept on Sundays after lunch, I sneaked upstairs to the lady because she had grandchildren. Every Sunday the grandchildren came and there was a big ruckus. And I liked to play with them, and she let me in her apartment. And this apartment was wall to wall covered with pictures of him and her in lovely family, lovely couple, smiles, a positive sensation I got there, a positive vibe as we call it nowadays, that this cannot be a bad man. There's something wrong. About 10, 12, we started to learn about that war. This gap between 1933 and 1945 was gradually being filled by the information that was conveyed to us at school. And what we heard was approximately the following. Hitler came to power in 1933, actually a democratically elected leader who was bestowed upon the honor to be the prime minister by the outgoing prime minister Papen and by the president Hindenburg. And in the moment he was appointed chancellor, he turned Germany upside down into a dictatorship. And many people disappeared in camps, in work camps. The Germans started the Second World War. 50, 60 million people died. Among them, 6 million Jews as collateral damage of war. On the 8th of May, 1945, the war was over and the Nazis left Germany like the Huns, huff and puff, and we returned to the normal life. This was, of course, a bunch of horse manure. Don't want to use the other word. This was not the truth. But that was what we had to suffice with. And Germany changed, and specifically the first generation of the second generation that born into, they demanded answers. And these answers were given. And I remember the first Holocaust trial in Frankfurt in 1962 to 1963, where the first time we heard the term Auschwitz and those who were tried as criminals in Auschwitz-Birkenau. I didn't completely understand what that meant, but something was going on. Then we had from 1966 to 1969 a chancellor, Kurt Georg Kiesinger, prime minister, who himself not only was a member of the Nazi party, he also was a member or a senior official in the Nazi propaganda ministry. And when that came out, the revolution, the street revolution started with the young student revolution. I was too young to be part of it. And as a result, a new chancellor was elected in 1969, whose name was Willy Brandt, who himself was a total breaker with the past. He was a socialist who had to flee Germany in 1933 and to escape certain death, and fled to Norway. From Norway, he fled to Sweden. And from Sweden, he returned to Germany in 1949 to rebuild the Social Democratic Party, which rose to power in 1969. And one of his first acts as a prime minister was to travel to Poland, to Warsaw, and in December 1970, and in front of the Ghetto Memorial, he sank on his knees, bowed his head, and asked for forgiveness what Germany did. And I remember that because his picture kneeling in front of the memorial was on the front page of every newspaper in Germany, including ours. And I remember my father's reaction. He slammed the newspaper on the breakfast table, yelling and screaming, "Schau mal her, Bernd, wieder ein Verräter. Look, Bernd, again a traitor." Now I was stunned because I was raised by my mother. My father was often not in the house. He was traveling to Bonn. He was in the end senior member of a Ministry of Civil Defense. So he was out of the house mostly. And every 2 weeks I saw him. So the education I got from my mother's side, and as she was an Orthodox Catholic, I went to Catholic kindergarten, Catholic elementary school. I was an altar boy. My mother wanted me to become a priest. Obviously, that didn't work out. And so kneeling in front of a memorial was, for me, a Catholic, something positive. Why is my father so mad? And the same man who so humbly asked for forgiveness became a symbol of the new Germany. And this new Germany was the host of the Olympics in 1972 in Munich, was awarded the Olympics, and that was supposed to show us the break from the past. 1936, Adolf Hitler hosted the Olympics in Germany and abused the propaganda purposes. 1972, the new democratic, at least West Germany, the democratic Germany, hosted the Olympics again. And they opened on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in August, summer day in 1972. And the chancellor, who had this tremendous moral standing in the Western world, opened the Olympics to a great fanfare. And I remember, because we got our first TV, my father purchased the first TV for that event, black and white though. He invited friends over. There was a festive environment. Everybody was drinking, eating snacks, and it was a happy day. And all the teams paraded into the stadium. We watched it on TV. And suddenly one team paraded into the stadium carrying a flag with a star inside. And in that moment, all adults felt silent. Nobody said a word. And I asked myself, I was 14 years old. That's weird. This do not ask the question moment. This is just the Olympics. There's a team carrying a flag and another team carrying a flag. Could it be Norway, Sweden? I didn't know the difference. I just noticed the difference in their reaction. And this team, the Israeli team who proudly paraded into the stadium, were brutally attacked 10 days later by a group of Palestinian terrorists. We know now that this group of terrorists were guided by the East German Security Service, Communist Germany Security Service, provided with money, with passports, and with logistics. And they climbed in the nighttime on September the 6th, 1972, climbed the very, very flimsy fence erected between the dormitories of the athletes and the Olympic Village, attacked the Israelis in their dormitories, killed 2 of them, butchered 2 of them on the spot, and the remainder were taken hostage. The German government, deeply embarrassed that Jews were killed on German soil, asked the Olympic Committee, because Germany was not was the host but not the organizer, asked the Olympic Committee to stop the Olympics, and the Olympic Committee refused initially for the first day, and then they closed the Olympics for at least for a few hours. The German government dispatched highest-ranking members of the German government, among them the Minister of Interior, to the Olympic Village to negotiate face-to-face with the terrorists. There's an iconic picture that our Minister of I think it was Civil Affairs, Genscher, asked and begged the terrorist leader, his name was Issa, at least that we called him, to accept German government officials in lieu of the Israelis as hostages. The terrorists refused. They demanded to be flown out with from a military airport nearby Munich to an Egyptian, most likely Egypt, Cairo, or Libya, Tripoli, to fly all out with the hostages, and that Israel exchanges on the same day terrorists or releases terrorists from 250 of them from Israeli prisons. The German government agreed, and in the nighttime, 2 helicopters took off from the Olympic Village. Each helicopter has evenly distributed the terrorists and the hostages. They flew towards the military airport outside Munich called Fürstenfeldbruck, and then all hell broke loose. What we saw and what I saw and what I heard, I never forget. Firefight, explosions, firefight lasting for 2 hours at least, and then deafening silence. And around 3 o'clock in the morning, a journalist from an American network turned towards the camera, totally exhaustedly told the simple sentence, "They're all gone." What happened is the German police tried to liberate the hostages, and they failed because they were outgunned and overpowered. The Israeli Mossad units on the ground, specifically Mossad Kidon units, begged them not to attack the terrorists because they're highly skilled marksmen. The German police did it anyway. As a result, Issa, the terrorist leader, threw a hand grenade in his last second on life, because he was seriously wounded and died instantly afterwards, threw a hand grenade in one helicopter which exploded, and all the Israelis perished in a fireball. In the other helicopter, he sprayed with machine gun fire. Everybody died. And the next day, this iconic picture again in the newspaper that changed my life. 2 helicopters on the tarmac, 1 burned out with the charred remains of the Israelis inside, the other helicopter with the bodies of the Israelis slumped over the seats, covered with blood-stained linen, and a big headline in German: "Jews killed in Germany again." I speak perfect German still, and I understand what that means, and I understood it also as a child, as a 14-year-old young boy. But this again implied that something happened before, and I didn't know about that. So I asked my father, I said, what does it mean? And my father looked at me and said, look what they did to us again. They do it again to us now. They, the Jews. Look, wherever they are, there's just trouble. So the victims as perpetrators and the perpetrators as victims. I didn't understand that because it was a horrific event. And in school, we started to talk about it. And for the first time in September, October 1972, I heard from the mouth of our teachers, in the absence of a Holocaust curriculum, the word Holocaust, the word Auschwitz, Birkenau, Majdanek, Eichmann, Mengele, and the execution of 6 million people, the murder of 6 million people as part and parcel of German government policy. I was shocked. How can it be? And I asked myself, my father, the hero, the man who was given the Iron Cross by Adolf Hitler pinned on his uniform, he must know something. I need to know from him because I trusted him. And when I came home and asked my father, and said he was there for the weekend in school, and he asked me what he learned in school. In school, we learned about the Holocaust. He slammed the fist on the table and yelled and said, Bernd, your teachers are all communists. Holocaust is a lie. Don't bring this nonsense back in our house. So I was caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, my father, whom I adored and feared, says one thing, and on the other hand, my teachers, whom I adored, not feared though, but respected, told me another thing. So somebody is telling me a lie. And I started to read whatever I could about that time, already published. The protocols from the 1963 Auschwitz trials in Frankfurt, books that were published already and mostly from abroad in English and some in German. And the more I read, the more I had the sinking feeling, the suspicion. My father won't tell me because he was involved. That was for me clear, something happened. And so I decided to ask my father. Obviously, there was a problem, he wouldn't talk about it, but as a child of an alcoholic parent, I knew my father went through 3 phases during the day when he was at home. Phase 1, he was looking for a drink. He was restless, irritable, and discontent. Phase 3, he was drunk and you couldn't talk to him. And phase 2 was the twilight zone. I call it nowadays the Schicker zone. I make it up. And in this twilight zone, he was open, soft. He was actually get me money when I needed something. I could manipulate him. And in this twilight zone moment, I asked him questions. And the answers I can group in three categories. First of all, when I asked him for the first time about the Holocaust, he said, look, Bernd, what allegedly ever happened, so he already admitted something happened, what allegedly happened, we, the Wehrmacht, didn't do anything. It was all the SS. Now, that was a blatant lie. I found out from the lady upstairs, Nina von Stauffenberg, whom I interviewed on several occasions, and she willingly shared with me the information that her husband, a former colonel, after his significant war injuries that he sustained in North Africa, was dispatched then to and referred to the Ministry of Interior and then to the Chief of Staff office. And he witnessed the fact that Jews were killed, that trains were not available, train capacity were not available for supply of the troops at the front, but train capacity was used to supply human cannon fodder to Auschwitz. So everybody knew. And my father knew too. 20 years after his death, I found evidence about it. A picture of him sitting next to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, in 1942 in Russia. And when the head of the SS sits together with a decorated Wehrmacht officer like my father was, it was not about tank tactics. It was about murder, securing kill zones. The Wehrmacht surrounded areas, and then in these areas, in these kill zones, Jews were killed. My father knew it, absolutely. Then in phase 2, when I asked him, he said, look, specifically when this civilian killed, we talked at that time still about 6 million civilians that were killed. He said, look, first of all, in war, there are combatants and non-combatants. We as soldiers, officers, we fell under the category of Geneva Convention. And according to the Geneva Convention, if somebody is not in a uniform and wears a weapon, he's a combatant, a terrorist, a partisan, and you can kill him. So he invoked the Geneva Convention as kind of the shield to kill civilians and the justification to kill civilians. Well, I knew already the answer, and I just asked him a rhetoric question. You tell me that 1.2 million Jewish children were gassed in Auschwitz, the bodies burned in the ovens, the bones crushed and scattered on the killing fields of Birkenau. You tell me that they fought against the mightiest army in the world? This is bull thing. And then finally, one day, he was totally drunk. He told me, He told me point blank, he said, Bernd, you're weak. Your generation is weak. You don't have the moral strength. You don't have the core to be a German, because what we did to the world should give us a medal. It should give us the Nobel Prize, because we killed and we removed all that. You didn't use the term killed. We removed and neutralized all the dreck in the East, the Schmutz, the Lichluch. That's the way you refer to the Jews. And that was the end. That was the last straw that broke the camel's back of trust I had with my father, and I turned away from him. And I asked one of my teachers, and said, who was a former Jesuit priest, I asked him, how can I deal with that? And he said, we need to make amends. I said, amends means I need to make amends to the Jews. I never met a Jew before. I said, I can arrange that. And he belonged to a progressive wing of the Catholic Church that invited each year a group of Israelis, Jews and Arabs alike. And the program was called Neve Shalom, to Germany. And they were in traveling together and living together and vacationing together. They should talk and find it common points of interest and agreement. And this group I was assigned to as the only German. And when young people get together, regardless from what background, the first thing that you ask yourself, what makes you alike? And the last thing you want to ask about, what separates you? So music, books, this was before Google, Schmoogle, and internet and all that stuff. And I must say, I like these really girls a lot. That's nothing wrong with it, but I don't have the halo around my head that I was driven purely by spiritual needs. I bonded with one Israeli girl who said, Tacheles, I mean, they're very straightforward. If you like me, you come to Israel and visit my parents. And I was a big Schwitzer. I said, absolutely, I'm going to do it. There were just two little problems. I neither had a passport, no money. So when they left and I was kind of heartbroken, I worked in the summer jobs. I got my money together. I got my first passport. I was 18 plus years old. And I traveled to Israel in an adventurous way that I do not want you to repeat. I hitchhiked to Munich, and from Munich, I took a train across the Alps to Ancona, the Adriatic port in the Adriatic Sea, the port city in Italy. And from there, I hitchhiked, so to say, a ride on a ferry on the deck that went from Ancona to Piraeus, Cyprus, to Israel, to Haifa. I do not recommend this. This is not a cruise. And by reprovisioning in Piraeus, I send her a telex informing her that I will be there at a certain time and a certain day. And we arrived in Haifa. And it was a very emotional arrival. I remember when the ferry slowly shipped into the port of Haifa, the Carmel Mountains were visible, beautiful impression on the horizon. And when we docked, I stepped on the first time on the ground of Israel, and I was not excited. I was horrified, because I asked myself, what is if somebody recognizes my name or relates my name to something that my father did? But all those doubts were wiped away when I met her, and after the customs, embraced her, and she said, look, let's go to my parents' house. And we drove with the Shehut, a community taxi at that time, up to the Carmel Mountains to an area called Neve Shanan, which was a working class neighborhood, very small houses. And her parents were literally waiting outside, receiving me like the long lost son. And her father chit-chatted with me in Yiddish. I had no idea what he was talking about, took my rucksack. Her mother took my bag. And we walked into this tiny, tiny apartment, and they showed me a room which was mine, and they all moved into one room, which was the living room and bathroom combined. And they were so interested to know about me, but they spoke Yiddish and the daughter interpreted. And at dinner with hummus, trina, falafel, suddenly her father looked at me and said in good German, halting but good German, if you want to speak German, Bernd, I can still speak it. And I looked at him and said, how did you learn German? And didn't say a word. He looked into my eyes, pulled up the sleeve of his shirt and showed me in the forearm the number tattooed, and told me, ich war in den Lagern. I was in the camps, plural. And I survived the death march in January 1945 from Auschwitz, and stayed in Germany, a displaced person camp, and for 3 years until I got permission to travel to Israel, to immigrate to Israel. And I must tell you, not all Germans were monsters, but I want to know if people like you, your generation, know what happened. Do they teach you that? And I honestly answered him, no, not enough. I was in shock. First time in a Jewish home, first time in Israel, first time in a home of a Holocaust survivor. I didn't know what to answer that. And 2 days later, her father took me to a trip, him and me alone, to Yad Vashem in Yerushalayim, the Holocaust Memorial. And he took my hand and walked with me through the exhibit. And I collapsed emotionally, physically. I could not take it. And he said, look, it's not you. It's not your fault. But you need to understand, we survived. And I looked at him and I asked myself, how do they take, in a positive sense, the Jews, the strength to survive such a horrific event, rebuild their personal lives, their professional lives, rebuild an old country anew? There's something unique with them. I want to know more about it. And my way back to Germany, I pondered the question, how can I find out more about Jews? Which was difficult because there were hardly any Jews left, about 25,000. And those who were left, they attended community services and synagogues. They were totally sealed off from the outside world. But there was one tiny community, Kehila, in our neighborhood in Bamberg with 30 Holocaust survivors. They have the backyard of a building in downtown Bamberg. You can enter the community. And I stood at this door, knocked at the door, and an old man looked at me suspiciously, didn't want to open the door completely, and asked me, "Was willst du? What do you want?" And I looked at him. I must have rambled something, I don't know what, that he felt comfortably to open the door. And I walked in this dark corridor, and there was barely lit by a light in the corner. He told me it's Inertamid. I didn't know what that meant. And the wall was covered with granite plates, and each granite plate were inscribed the names of people. And I asked him, "What is that?" He said, "You don't know? These are the names of all the Bamberg Jews who didn't come back from Theresienstadt, 1,500. And he walked me to his office. It was a hot day, no air condition, no the curtain were drawn, windows closed, no fan. And he sat there, very pale skin, with a white short-sleeved shirt, and the number tattooed on his forearm stood up. And I stared at it. He said, "Look, my name is Itzhak Gosenberg. This is the number in Auschwitz. I survived Auschwitz. What do you want to do? What do you want?" I said, "I want more information. I want to learn." I said, "Why?" And I told him the story of my father. And he said, "Look, sad story, but take a book and bring it back. You're German. I trust you." I said, "I read all the books. I want to help." I said, "Help?" I said, "You want to learn?" I said, "Look, young man, when you want to help and you want to learn, it's a two-way street. It's a Geschäft. You will be my Shabbos goy, and in return, I will teach you." So a Shabbos goy versus teaching sounded like a good idea. I had no idea what a Shabbos goy was. And so he told me, "Come on 6 o'clock on Friday and I'll show you what to do." I was there at 6 o'clock, bull. He came there somewhere at 7:38, and he looked at me and said, "Why are you here?" I said, "Because he told me 6 o'clock." I said, "First of all, we're living in a different time zone. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. You can take it loosely, okay? So don't be so German." He showed me what to do for the Shabbos, that I could do all the manual work that Orthodox Jews cannot do. And he told me one thing: when the alte Kacker, that's what he said, the old members come in here, they won't like you because you're breaking into this, you intruded in their life, in this small Stiebelech that they have this for themselves. And he was right. When they came, they were hickering and pickering, but they accepted me. And so every Friday, Saturday, week by week, month by month, holiday by holiday, I was there. And the longer I was exposed to this Jewish lifestyle, I absorbed the liturgy, the language, the mannerism, the religion, that I moved myself more from my family of origin towards this family of choice. And it came to several breakups, and one major breakup so to stay in time. One major breakup that happened was Christmas fell on a Friday night. And for an Orthodox Catholic household, Christmas was, my mother was a big deal, with midnight mass, symbolic food, carb and lentil soup. Then my father was ringing the bell. My mother was opening the room, the massive door towards the living room. My father was standing there next to the Christmas tree with real candles in his dark suit, white shirt, and the Knight's Cross on his neck, and singing festive Christmas hymns. And I was not there. When I came back the next day, all hell broke loose. And my father demanded to know where I was and said, "Look, let's stop with this Greek tragedy. I will not," and I tell you, I will not participate in any of those ceremonies, sitting with somebody at the table who has blood on his hands. You're a murderer. And he told me one word: "House, get out." Well, there was a problem. I was in the second to last year of medical school, and I had a scholarship though, but I needed some extra money. And I got a little bit nervous. And Itzhak must have told other members in the community, because one of them approached me, and I never took money from the community. One of them approached me, and his name was Aaron, who never talked to me in 5 years I was there, and looked at me and said, "Du bist der Goy." "Yeah." "Dein Name is Bernd." "Yeah." "Hör mal zu, listen, deine Schuhe und deine Jacke sind schmutzig. Your shoes and the jacket is dirty. Buy new stuff." Gave me 100 mark. I mean, he was wrong. It was not dirty, but 100 mark was a lot of money. I walked over to Itzhak in his office and said, "Aaron gave me 100 mark. He said, "What did he do?" "Aaron, this stingy guy, he gave you 100 mark. Did you ask him for 200? I said, "No." "Why not?" I said, What? He said, "Come on, sit down. It's a joke." You have to understand one thing that you still don't understand. We are scarred people. We who survived Auschwitz have no emotions left. Many have very difficult times to get their emotions in the row. I married a non-Jewish woman. She became Jewish and built me a beautiful family home. But Aaron, the only thing what we know from him, that from the Red Cross, that he was in Auschwitz. And Aaron, in his last 6 months of life, which I didn't know, he had cancer. He told me the story, what happened to him. And it was a horrible story because he was a surviving member of a Sonderkommando. Those Jews who got a reprieve of 90 days alive that herded their fellow Jews into a gas chamber, asked him to give them the number, give him the number, little card with the number, said, hang this your clothing on this and this there where your number is, and then you get it on the other side. The gas was dropped into in the crematoriums. When the screaming and banging stopped, they opened the doors with the gas mask, and the Sonderkommando took out the bodies, burned the bodies, crushed the bones, and throw the remainder in the pits right next to the gas chambers. And Aaron cried like a baby. And when he died, Itzhak asked me, Bernd, we need to have a Chefa Kadisha. We are one man short. Can you come from the university and help us? I knew what a Chefa Kadisha was, so I traveled to Bamberg and said, what do you want me to do? You need to be part of it. I said, I can't, I'm not a Jew. He said, you're one of us. And so we cleaned the body overnight in the ceremony, then buried him. And Itzhak gave me the prayer book and said, you know what to say, the Kaddish. And I said the Kaddish. And that was when I crossed the line. I knew that's in no way a return. And I asked Richard, Itzhak, I want to become a Jew. Itzhak looked at me, showed me the number again. You only buy yourself suffering. Don't sacrifice yourself. Be a tzedek. Said, I want to become a Jew. So he sent me to a rabbi in Frankfurt with the intent to detox me out of it, which he tried very hard. The rabbi in Frankfurt, when every time I met him, he said, I will teach you, but no conversion talk. That's the condition. And every time I met him, of course, I asked him about conversion, the completion of our shiur. And then in March, approximately March 1986, he gave up. He said, I sent you a case to the rabbinical court in Bamberg, in Trier. Whatever they decide, it's their business. I'm one member of the court. I have one voice, but no guarantee. But until you get there, you need to make some surgical corrections to your physique. I don't want to talk about it, but it's not a nose job. And after that, it has to be done in an Orthodox hospital, in Orthodox Moel, which we did in Basel, Switzerland. 3 months later, I immersed myself. I traveled to Metz and was immersed in a mikveh, in an Orthodox mikveh in a Hasidic community. And in December 1986, I underwent a halachic conversion in front of the rabbinical court. And I remember it as it was yesterday. Not only because it was very long and it was very like a hearing in a court, it was very personal. And the chief rabbi asked me a simple question. Look, I want to know, I know who you are, I know of your character references, everything. I know what you know about Judaism, but this is not a contest. This is something else. I want to know why you as a German wants to become a Jew. And I told him the story that from hate of my father, motivation to join the Jewish people turned into love and care and admiration. And I wanted to be a Jew because hate turned into admiration. And I converted. And the chief rabbi asked me, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to Israel. Why? I said, the only thing I can give is not money, is not on my knowledge as a young physician, but is to fight. And so I was immediately awarded Israeli citizenship already. I got the Oleh Hadash status. And 1 month later, I left Germany, tried to say goodbye to my parents, but they refused. My father was yelling and screaming when I came home the night before I left and demanded that I should leave. My mother was crying, and I traveled to Israel, one-way street, one-way ticket with El Al. Went to a kibbutz. From a kibbutz, I was assigned to a hospital in downtown Tel Aviv, Ichilov, at that time, to get my German license up to Israeli par. Then I was drafted immediately into the Israeli military because I gave up my German citizenship, and was basic training, officers training. It was the first year of the first Intifada in 1988, and I was assigned to a base right next to Ramallah, Beit El. And Ramallah was the hotbed on the West Bank of the first Intifada. We were squeezed between the Ramallah and the settlers in Beit El. So it was a combat zone. I was in the uniform of a lieutenant. My commanding officer was standing there with the recruits and said, look, it's tough, it's hard, it's war. When something happens, this is your doctor. You change your name for Christ's sake. And he didn't say Christ's sake, but change your name. And I was standing there in my uniform as a lieutenant, and I asked myself, if they find out that I'm son of a Nazi in drag in uniform, they will kill me. I can never talk about it. I was fearful about the reaction. So I threw my past into his virtual closet, slammed the door shut, turned the key in the lock, and threw the key away. And that was a mistake. I came only out when my son asked me this question when he was 15. Dad, who is my grandfather? And I told him. And you have to imagine, as a young boy, 15 years old, very impressionable, going to Jewish school, tefillin in the morning, um, Jewish education. He said, I tell my friends about it. He said, don't tell your friends, please. But my luck, maybe my luck in retrospect, they had a family history day 3 weeks later. And my son was asked what his family history is, and he raised his hand enthusiastically. I wasn't there, but I was told that's what he did. Raised his hand and said, my grandfather was a famous Nazi. Now that's of course not good when you're in school, in a Jewish school. And I was called to the principal's office. And when I arrived, the principal and the rabbi were sitting there, and the principal was very upset. Dr. Wollschläger, your son told us this verdrehte Geschichte that your father was a Nazi. What's wrong with him? Does he take drugs? There's a divorce at home, I know, but some stress. I said, look, Rabbi, principal, no, it's my life. It's the story I've told him. And the rabbi asked me, did you ever talk about it? I said, no. He took me by my hand to his classroom, said, talk. And I did. And then for the first time, I had this desire to talk about it. The weight was lifted off my shoulder. The shame was lifted off my shoulder. And I tried to close the circle of life that I opened so many years ago. And I decided to travel back to Germany to visit my parents together with my son in December 2004. Visiting the only place I could visit them in the cemetery. They were gone. And ironically, in this town, in old towns in Germany, the Jewish and the Christian cemetery are actually in one area, but only divided by a wall. And my parents' gravesite is located one row parallel to the wall that separates the Christian from the Jewish cemetery. You can see it specifically now in winter. It's a very stark contrast. And when I was standing there at my parents' gravesite, I was all choked up and I didn't know what to tell my son. But look, Tal, this is the story. This is what we need to learn. When you never step out of the shadow of history, the history will cast a shadow upon you, like here in this gravesite, where the Jewish gravestones cast a shadow to the other side. What I learned is to step out of the shadow, looked in the future, by understanding the past, looked in the future, and move forward with the commitment that it will never happen again on my watch. And that's what I'm doing. And the reason I'm talking about it, because I understood from my father one thing, that words have consequences. Words of hatred have consequences. If nobody raises his own voice against these words and let them just pass, they fall on fertile ground and sprout into deeds. And if these deeds will be left unchallenged, then habits will form. If these habits prevail, so characters will absorb those habits. And if these characters dominate, they will create social norms that allows to makes killing of other people normal. That doesn't get the Germans off the hook and saying, well, this was just a process everybody went through. This was a norm of society, normative behavior, that you kill Jews and it is okay. And this is repeating itself over and over again. Words, habits, deeds, character formation, norms. And it happens here in the United States right now. This is not a political talk, but the emergence of Nazis, white power movement, and all those really, really fringe groups are now dominating our society. And we're living in fear. I walk around with a loaded gun. I tell my patients, tell my family where are the points of evacuation if something happens. We're back there because people don't raise their voices against words of hatred. That's why I take the opportunity to speak to such a group of viewers in the UK, that we have to band together. We have to set a positive sign. We have to fight against this wave, tsunami of hatred in a very simple way, in speaking up and speaking out and bearing witness that it will never happen again. Thank you.
Okay, wow, that was incredible. I can't even, I'm, to be honest, just beginning to process things. It's absolutely incredible. And thank you for sharing your feelings and experiences and then applying it.
Thank you.
I think if it's okay, if people have any questions, is that
Sure.
okay?
Absolutely. Therefore,
amazing. Okay, great.
So just grab a cup of coffee.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think I need one myself.
Yes, go ahead.
That is incredible. Okay, so if anyone, I'm going to stop the recording in case just questions wise, it's easier